In this week's Bizline, COP28 opens door for investment in green economy. And later on, Vietnam makes significant progress in policy for green economy development. Hello there, you're tuning into Bizline on VTV International. Green growth is increasingly become a top priority for economies around the world, aiming to move towards sustainable development and respond to climate change. Vietnam is no exception, as the country is among the hardest hit nations by climate change. This will also help Vietnam catch up with global development trends and fulfill its historic commitment to achieve net zero emission by 2050. With strategic plans, the country has made significant progress in its path towards this goal. So what step has the country taken to unlock its potential to promote a green economy and attract investment into green economic sectors? What obstacles need to be addressed in this regard? We'll find out more in this week's episode of Bizline. But first, let's have a brief recap of Vietnam messages at the 28th session of the Conference of the Parties, or COP28, that recently took place in Dubai, to understand how it's opening doors for investment in green economic sectors in Vietnam in the following clip.
Amidst active and responsible participation at COP28, Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh conveyed impressive messages.
Các quốc gia phát triển phải tăng cường hỗ trợ hơn nữa cho các quốc gia đang phát triển và chậm phát triển, nhất là nguồn vốn ưu đãi, chuyển giao công nghệ tiên tiến, đào tạo nguồn nhân lực chất lượng cao, quản trị thông minh và hoàn thiện thể chế thị trường hiện đại phù hợp hiệu quả với từng quốc gia. Ngược lại, các quốc gia đang phát triển, chậm phát triển phải nỗ lực hơn nữa, không bị động, không trông chờ, không nghỉ lại, mà phải nâng cao năng lực tự cường, tự chủ, tự vươn lên với tinh thần không ai làm tốt cho mình hơn chính bản thân mình.
The Prime Minister also announced a resource mobilization plan to implement the political declaration on establishing a Just Energy Transition Partnership, JETP, between Vietnam and the International Partnership Group. This makes Vietnam the first recipient country in the JETP to announce such a plan.
I think that is a very big step forward because it does detail all the different moving parts of energy transition or just energy transition in Vietnam. We love it.
Very dedicated to renewable energy and greening the grid. So as far as I am working towards implementation, this in the region will take a leadership role and have that demonstrating effect for nearby countries and also for the global community.
This has received great support from the business community, especially in terms of investment in the country's green sectors.
For us as investors, the signal from him and the Vietnamese government is that Vietnam is open for business and Vietnam is really standing out as an easy-to-do business place. And for us, the commitment to continue the green transition. That is the key message for us as investors in the renewable energy industry, that Vietnam is really serious about the green transition and really serious about developing its renewable energy.
Now is the perfect time for Vietnam to capture those opportunities by decarbonizing its economy, and the existing technology and solutions are already sufficient to enable that green transformation. So this commitment from both Vietnam and its international partner surely have sent a strong signal to the large international companies in those low carbon industry to shift their global production base to Vietnam.
This plan is not only to mobilize resources for energy transition. It is also a plan of reform, as it helps improve the business environment and ensure conditions for Vietnam to attract the private sector to invest in energy production at the lowest cost.
Preliminary research results from Boston Consulting Group indicate that the transition of the wind and solar power industries alone could contribute 70 to 80 billion US dollars to Vietnam's GDP and directly create approximately 90,000 to 105,000 jobs in the country. The clean hydrogen ecosystem, which relies on renewable energy, also has the potential to contribute 40 to 45 billion US dollars to the GDP annually and create about 40,000 to 50,000 jobs.
In order to gain insight into the topic, we invited to our studio Mr. Denzel Eves, Vice Chairman of the British Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, or BRICAM, and also Managing Director of Pioneer International Consulting. Well, thank you so much for being here with us.
No, thank you for inviting me.
Vietnam is said to have great potential and opportunities to attract foreign investment into green sectors and low-carbon industries. So what is your thought on this?
The process of investing into green energy and the overall process of energy transition takes quite a long time. So you're maybe looking at an investment horizon of 10 or 20 years. So within the context of Vietnam, I think that's a very positive one, because Vietnam's long-term planning and long-term policy, combined with a very kind of accommodating environment for foreign direct investment, means that investment into Vietnam's green energy sector can align with long-term investment strategies with companies which are very much moving towards a position and a strategy of investing in energy transition. So whether that's companies requiring carbon neutral power supply or investing in new supply chains in electric vehicles or indeed renewable energy power projects themselves, the context of Vietnam provides a positive backdrop for that long-term green investment.
Now, recently Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính joined COP28. So how can his participation and his speeches about Vietnam realization of its commitment on energy transition open a door for investors in those sectors?
The Prime Minister at COP26 identified a number of different areas where foreign investment into Vietnam's green energy sector could be materialized. So one of those was the renewable energy ecosystem. So within that context, there will be the whole context of the investment, from the supply chain to the power project to the investment in the people who work in those plants, which is the training and the capacity building and the research. And then from that also the prospect of being able to produce and export the new energy from renewable energy projects. So the renewable energy ecosystem was one of the areas which was identified as a key area for foreign investment at COP28. Alongside that, there was the identification of investment in Vietnam's transmission grid and also energy efficiency projects, and also then the wider opportunity to invest in Vietnam's decarbonisation process, so that the carbon emission reduction targets, which really form the backbone of the COP28 commitments, can be realised.
This Finnish corporation is working with Power Generation Joint Stock Corporation 3 to build a 300 megawatt flexible power plant using reciprocating internal combustion engines in Ninh Binh province to replace an old coal power plant. The plant will be able to use cleaner fuels, such as LNG, and potentially transition to carbon-free fuels like hydrogen. The progress Vietnam has made in its policy and mechanisms for green transition has partly helped the company in developing this project.
We provide flexible energy solution, including balancing engine power plant and energy storage system to support the integration of the renewable energy. And we're very happy to see that both of these technologies have been very well recognized in the recent PTP8, especially for engine power plants, starting with 300 MW by 2030 and increase significantly to 46,000 MW by 2050.
Similarly, this Danish company is also committed to investing in Vietnam for the long term, thanks to the country's potential, commitment, and actions in developing a green economy.
Putting Power Development Plan 8, getting it approved at the beginning of this year is a really good milestone. And it was nice to see that as they finalised the draft for Power Development Plan 8, the government actually built in the net zero target. We're here for many, many years and you won't see us going anywhere, and we are still expanding. We're the largest offshore wind developer in the country and we'll stay that way.
In addition to the Power Development Plan 8, Vietnam has taken significant steps towards green economy development and the overall green transition.
Prime Minister Chính established the National Steering Committee, bringing together all of the national and local level and the sectoral level interests. Vietnam last year established its national climate change strategy and issued a new nationally determined contribution, its own commitment, which every country has, to emissions reduction pathway.
However, foreign investors expect that these legal frameworks can be translated into reality more quickly with clearer investment guidance and incentives in green sectors. Therefore, the country will not miss out on high quality and substantial foreign investment capital.
Vietnam is assessed to achieve significant progress in terms of policy and regulations in order to foster the development of green economic sectors. What are the most significant ones in your viewpoint?
I think there are two parts to Vietnam's energy transition policy and planning and legislation. So on one side, there's the commitment to climate change ambitions and CO2 reductions. So we see from Resolution 98 and later through Decision 896 a commitment to the Paris Agreement and also a national climate change strategy. And there we see Resolution 55 and Power Development Plan number 8 really creating the basis on which renewable energy can become a core and ultimately in the future majority proportion of the total energy mix in the country. So together, the two sides of that policy context really set Vietnam on a path to have an opportunity to not just net zero in 2050, but the development of material new renewable energy capacity, and very interestingly, and I think quite excitingly for Vietnam, the prospect of new energy production, which would be in the form of hydrogen and ammonia, creating greater levels of energy security for the country, and also the prospect of being able to export power within the Southeast Asia region to neighbouring countries, both on land and through sea. So the policy backdrop really has enabled the implementation of investment over the course of the next 15 to 20 years.
However, businesses still show some concerns related to regulations for those sectors, particularly in renewable energy. So how can those issues be addressed in your opinion, and what should be the priority for Vietnam?
I think the first area with respect to investment is the approval process. So really giving those initial approvals to enable project investment. With that first, and the PDP8 implementation plan is a key part of that with respect to the next phase of investment in the renewable energy sector. The second will then be the basis on which those projects are developed. So supporting the efficient and timely development of those projects. And Vietnam's got a good track record in that in the renewable energy sector. So it's about enabling that for the next phase of renewable energy investment. And then for the larger projects, it's going to be a question of ensuring the right investment framework for large-scale investment in renewable energy. And that's perhaps looking at the risk allocation between the investor and on the Vietnamese side with respect to how the projects are structured. And in order that then the international funding and financing can be unlocked and delivered for those projects. And in that context, the financing and funding obligation for large-scale energy projects is quite significant. So creating the right investment environment for that is going to be really essential going forward.
Vietnam's green economy is still in its early stages. As a result, the country is seeking support and cooperation from international partners and businesses. Several partners have expressed their willingness to assist Vietnam in various ways, with the aim of accelerating its green transition and promoting the development of its green economy.
Working together with our big European companies like CIP, COP, like Vestas, like Equinor, all these big companies with experience, we should encourage them to come to Vietnam, to transfer technology, and Vietnam will benefit from advantageous financing.
Chúng tôi hỗ trợ để xây dựng những cái khung pháp lý cho điện gió, điện mặt trời, các loại hình năng lượng tái tạo cũng như hiệu quả năng lượng Bên cạnh đó thì chúng tôi cũng có tổ chức những cái khóa tập huấn nâng cao năng lực cho các bên liên quan, từ nhà phát triển dự án, các đơn vị nghiên cứu, các nhà đầu tư, những cái đơn vị cho vay cũng như là các cơ quan quản lý nhà nước.
According to the World Bank, Vietnam has 39 green occupations, with an additional 88 occupations, accounting for 41% of total employment, that have the potential to transition to green. However, UNDP has highlighted that up to 60% of Vietnamese youth lack the necessary green skills to support this transition. Therefore, human resource training is a key focus of international support.
I think certainly there's a lot more training that needs to be done, but it's a growing sector, absolutely. Policy initiative, and then that would also help foster a training mindset towards, green thinking and green practice, because ultimately it's Vietnamese enterprises really that are going to make the difference in this.
We work in the energy cluster, the education cluster, where we help Vietnam with setting up vocational training, with the climate change adaptation cluster, and so on. We are recruiting qualified labor force from Germany, and they then will be trained in Germany for a couple of years, and then they return to Vietnam with newly acquired skills and knowledge, which they then can use here in the country.
Now, how can international support and cooperation contribute to fostering a green economy and sustainable development in Vietnam?
I think the prospect for international investment to support and Vietnam's energy transition is really significant. And I think that comes in two forms. There's the international funding from international partners, be those governments or development partners who are able to provide international public finance within the context of the Just Energy Transition Partnership. That's called the International Partners Group, and that International Partners Group has committed a minimum of 7.75 billion of that type of funding to support Vietnam's energy transition. Then you have the private sector. The private sector really comprised of two parts: the developers, so those are the energy companies and the investors that really want to invest in and operate the projects. They'll be bringing their private equity. And then you have the financing parties. So those are going to be the banks or the funds who want to enable the investment by the private sector developers. So together, those three entities can really complement one another to form a financing and funding solution for the most ambitious, the largest and planned projects in Vietnam. So it's really working out how do they work together with the Vietnamese government to deliver the right structure for those projects.
Now, at COP28, a number of partners agreed to provide support both financially and technically for Vietnam in general and Vietnamese business in particular. So how will this help Vietnam realize its net zero goal and also facilitate green economic sectors?
So the Just Energy Transition Partnership is aimed at supporting Vietnam to achieve its net zero ambition. So within that context, you'll have the international governments, which form one side of the Just Energy Transition Partnership called the International Partners Groups. And then you'll have the commercial financing parties, which are the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or the GFANs. So the International Partners Group and the GFANs come together to commit 15.5 billion to support Vietnam's energy transition. And the aim of that is really then to identify with Vietnam and Vietnam leading the process projects that can be the recipients of that funding. So at COP28, the Prime Minister announced what's called the Resource Mobilisation Plan. And the Resource Mobilisation Plan is the mechanism through which the projects, which will ultimately be the means by which net zero is achieved, can be identified, and then the basis on which the funding from the International Partners Group and GFANs can be channeled in to support the development of those projects. So the framework is in place, The next step is now to identify the basis on which the projects can be funded and financed.
Within the framework of COP28, this Vietnamese commercial bank successfully raised $300 million from two international financial organizations. The funds will be used to promote green credit and sustainable finance.
Ngân hàng Phát triển châu Á ADB với cái nguồn vốn để tài trợ cho cái lĩnh vực phát triển xanh, đặc biệt là lĩnh vực về nông nghiệp nông thôn. Thế và với các cái doanh nghiệp SME, với các cái hoạt động kinh doanh của họ mà cũng hướng đến mục tiêu là giảm phát thải và thân thiện môi trường. Thế thì nguồn vốn nó lên khoảng 200 triệu đô. Chúng tôi cũng ký một cái thỏa thuận hợp tác với ngân hàng Standard Chartered Bank, một cái định chế tài chính toàn cầu, và chúng tôi cũng có cái nguồn vốn khoảng 100 triệu đô để tài trợ cho các cái hoạt động về tài trợ thương mại.
International capital sources like these help stabilize the medium and long-term capital structures of domestic banks, enabling them to provide loans for green projects. However, for this capital to be allocated and utilized effectively, experts suggest that a comprehensive set of criteria for classifying green projects should be developed promptly. As such, the establishment of a clear and transparent legal mechanism is crucial.
Để khơi thông cái nguồn vốn này vào cho Việt Nam thì chúng ta phải có một cái hành lang pháp lý đơn giản và cái thủ tục tiếp nhận ODA một cách nhanh gọn và hiệu quả. Có thể chúng ta phải rà soát toàn bộ các cái luật hiện hành, ví dụ như là luật đầu tư, luật nợ công. Ngoài ra thì các bộ ban ngành cũng nên là có cái kế hoạch và quy hoạch chung và dài hạn, xác định rõ các cái lĩnh vực đầu tư công, lĩnh vực đầu tư tư nhân và các cái lĩnh vực mà ưu tiên sử dụng ODA.
At COP28, Standard Chartered also signed 4 Memoranda of Understanding, MOUs, with 4 Vietnamese enterprises to support their green and sustainable projects. The total value of these 5 MOUs is nearly $3 billion. The World Bank also has plans to provide Vietnam with $5 to $7 billion of financial support over the next 3 years. These capital sources are expected to drive the progress of the green transition and promote a green economy in Vietnam.
Now, at COP28, Standard Chartered also signed 5 memorandums of understanding with 1 Vietnamese commercial bank and Vietnamese businesses that worth around $3 billion. So how would this facilitate green projects development in Vietnam and also work toward the development of a green economy?
I think in terms of the financing support that can be provided in the commercial sector, it will be about increasing the capacity of local banks to lend into green projects. And then I think the second element is how can the international government funding be what is termed catalytic? So how can it increase the capacity of domestic banks, and also how can it support managing some of the risk that those domestic banks need to take? So you have the two processes. You have additional funding within the domestic financial system, combined with the additional support to manage some of the credit risk that might not otherwise have been taken by those financial institutions or by the private sector investors themselves. And it's that extra support that I think will be looked to come from the International Partners Group.
So what can be done to facilitate capital flows into those sectors and the development of green economy in Vietnam?
I think there's going to be, first of all, looking at how, particularly in the large projects, some of the right investment structures are created. So most of the investment into renewable energy projects today and going forward is going to be as an independent power project. So ensuring that investment structure is the right one. I think the second is then going to be to create the right environment so that the large-scale international funding that's going to be required to support those projects can be delivered. So that's going to be an element of having sort of catalytic support from the International Partners Group, and then working out the basis on which risk is allocated between the different parties, so that you have a context which is acceptable to foreign investors and to foreign lenders. So you've got a really strong backdrop in Vietnam. The policy direction is very much there. The planning is very much there through to 2050. The foreign investment is hugely interested in the market. The next step is going to be ensuring that the investment framework, and then with that, the enabling investment environment can be achieved.
Thank you so much for being here with us.
Great, thank you very much.
Vietnam aims to achieve a green economy worth $300 billion by 2050. To accomplish this goal, in addition to the participation of domestic businesses, Vietnam has been encouraging foreign investors to invest in green projects and seeking support from international partners in terms of technology, technique, experience, and preferential capital. With clear strategies, favorable policies and mechanisms for investors, the country expects to successfully establish its green economy, thereby achieving sustainable economic development, strengthening socio-economic development, and contributing to global efforts to mitigate climate change. And that's it for this edition of These Lines. Stay with us for more content, or you can download our app VTV Go from App Store and Google Play for a lot more. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.